Greetings from Costa Rica. Welcome back to Costa Rica FAQ. My name is Matt Rosensteele. I work with Coldwell Banker, Tamarindo Realty, broadcasting here from Playa Tamarindo in Guanacaste, Costa Rica. We're looking at the frequently asked question number 20, corporations here in Costa Rica, and this is chapter 2, covering the costs involved with corporation ownership. As always, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns about what you see, feel free to email me, matt@cbtamarindo.com. We'll get the information in the video here. Today, we'll be covering a few very basic questions on those costs. Number 1, we'll look at the costs to establish a corporation. Second, we'll talk about that big question, do corporations save transfer taxes? And really go into a point that I think is important to clarify in one of my big, very much something that inspires passion because I see it happening in sales or I see it happening complicating communication. And finally, we'll talk about the annual or ongoing costs of owning a corporation here in Costa Rica. As always, my favorite disclaimer, none of what I'm going to say is legal advice. Do confirm anything with your attorney here in Costa Rica when you go to close on a property or make a decision that's going to affect your investment. Without further ado, let's get started and talk about the costs to establish a corporation. I'm going to give you a rough number, an estimate, but in recent closings where I've had my buyers set up a brand new corporation in 2019 or 2020, it's costing about $850 total for the cost that the attorney is charging for everything to actually get that corporation registered and accept a property. I gave reasons for why you should incorporate in my previous video, chapter 1, check it out if you haven't already. But essentially that's another line item that can be added to your closing costs when you go to purchase your property. In addition to that $850, which maybe it'll be a bit more with some attorneys, maybe it'll be a bit less, but I think that's a pretty workable number. You're also going to see that at the time of creating your corporation, your attorney is probably going to charge you to register that corporation with the National Tax Authority, which you absolutely have to do whether you decide to be an active corporation collecting taxes, collecting rental income or collecting any kind of economic activity, or you're an inactive corporation, not doing anything and just holding the property. That registration with the National Tax Ministry might cost you an extra $150. Again, a charge that might vary with attorneys. Maybe someone will do it for free. But in total, I see that buyers are currently paying about $1,000 between that $850 cost to set up the corporation and the $150 to get it registered with the National Tax Ministry, which between those two steps gets you set up entirely ready for your property to be owned by the corporation, and for all the details of who the directors, shareholders, etc. Are determined through closing with your attorney. Second of all, a question that I discussed on my previous chapter about corporations, why you should or why you shouldn't incorporate, but a big question that people frequently ask. I've heard that I can save a lot of money in buying my property or in selling my property if I do so through the transfer of shares. And that's why they think the corporation is going to save a bunch of money because instead of transferring the title of the property at closing, what they do instead is endorse the shares of the corporation and transfer those from one owner to another. So 20 years ago, when people were doing this and holding titles in the name of a corporation, you could have a $500,000 farm, beautiful piece of land that's held by a corporation whose stock is on paper only worth $10. At the time of selling that $500,000 farm from party A to party B, instead of transferring the title, what they would say is, no, we're transferring the shares of stock of this corporation. The value of the shares is $10. So when we're paying the 1.5% transfer tax, or it's about there, we're going to charge that amount based on the value of those shares rather than the value of the property. As I mentioned on the previous episode, and that what I want to emphasize now is this is now illegal. There might be still people in the system, and I run across it, so it's not a hypothetical. There are still people here in Costa Rica who are going to say, well, why don't we just transfer the shares of the corporation at closing so we can save a bunch of money on taxes? A, that is illegal. They've closed the loophole. It is no longer allowed. You have to pay transfer taxes based on the value of what is being transferred. I can't give you the full details of the law. You should verify everything with your attorney, but the legal advice that I'm sitting on, that I get from my attorney very much, is that the taxes paid have to represent the real value of the title. And so transferring the shares of a corporation does not save you any money at the time of closing, or rather it shouldn't save you any money, especially given that now with the capital gains tax, you want to be sure that your title is represented exactly as how much you paid for it. Another video you can reference, the capital gains tax came into effect in July. Another reason that as a buyer of a property, you want your property to be registered with the actual value that you paid. You don't want to save money at the time of transfer and try and get out of transfer taxes, because you will be paying a capital gains tax down the road. Not to delve too much into taxes, let's keep moving on. Annual costs of a corporation, the ongoing maintenance costs that you're going to have to expect to pay. First of all, let's talk about the difference. You might have an active corporation, you might have an inactive corporation that's determined by whether or not you want to use that corporation for any economic activity. I have an active corporation, and recently in paying my annual taxes, I paid about $196, which was the tax that pretty much everyone would be paying on a corporation up to a reasonable level of income. The annual tax of $200 does increase if you've got an active corporation that's making a huge amount of money, so there are some differences and nuances, but let's call it $200 for an active corporation, and an inactive corporation, I saw the number and it was about, I think, 110 recently. Another annual fee that you'll have to pay is likely going to be a resident agent fee, or essentially an annual bill that your lawyer is going to send you for holding on to your corporate books and for also serving on paper as the resident agent here in Costa Rica for that corporation. It might be $150, it might be $50 a year. It's going to vary from attorney to attorney, but if you have your corporation's books in the custody of a lawyer during the year, and if they're serving as the legal representative here, i.e. if you're not a permanent resident here in Costa Rica, they will usually be charging you an annual fee that you might not see until someday you go to take your corporate books to sell your property or to complete a transaction, or you need to just get them out of that attorney's hands. They might say, well, I've had these now for 8 years. The resident agent fee that I told you I was going to charge was so much, and you might just get charged then. Just to put it on your radar, though, that is another one I would expect to see. And if you want to try and avoid that, sorry, attorneys, but if you do have a corporation here, hold on to your own books. Make sure you have them safe in a fireproof place, because you will need them to sell your property. They can be replaced down the line, but you can't avoid an attorney charging that fee if you keep custody of your books, and really if you take responsibility for the minimum it takes to keep your corporation in good standing with the government. What would that be? Well, also, you should expect that you're going to have to file an annual tax return, again, whether you're active or inactive. It doesn't matter if you're collecting rental income or if your corporation is just holding your property. You have to file a tax return here in Costa Rica every year. That tax return can say we had zero income, zero expense, on and on, but you do have to file that. If you're going to pay someone else to do it, I've seen fees all over the map, so I won't even comment here on how much it's going to cost. But do be aware that unless you're going to figure out how to navigate the government's online tax system and file your own taxes for your corporation, you will have to figure out annually who is going to file that, how much they're going to cost. So again, we're looking at the annual flat tax of about $200 for an active corporation, or maybe $110 for an inactive corporation. Your resident agent fees and filing your taxes is the major annual ongoing costs for a corporation. So in summary today, looking at the costs involved with a corporation here in Costa Rica, we looked at the cost to establish a corporation, about $1,000 based on local attorneys working with me. We discussed the question about transfer taxes and whether or not corporations help there. And finally, we looked at the annual operating costs of the corporation, which probably end up no more than about $500 if you're having people do everything for you. Anyhow, that was Costa Rica FAQ number 20, Chapter 2 on corporations. Tune in next time for Chapter 3, where we'll be looking at everybody's favorite question, taxes. Thank you very much for joining me. Again, my name is Matt Rosensteele. I work with Coldwell Banker Tamarindo Realty here in Guanacaste, Costa Rica. I appreciate you watching. Send me any questions by email, give me a ring. I look forward to hearing from you. Thank you, and pura vida.